So I was watching something the other day about potentially active serial killers, and when this individual's name didn't crop up, I thought, what the actual fuck? So we've all heard the likes of Harold Shipman, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, but this is a whole different kettle of fish. This is just a short rundown of events because there's quite a bit to get through. But if you want an extended version of this video, then feel free to drop it in the comments. But it is your fault if you end up with a 30-minute extended video from me about this individual. And when I tell you to strap in, you have been warned. Because this is just utterly mind-blowing and wild, start to finish. This potentially active serial killer goes by the name of Pedro Lopez. So Pedro Alonso Lopez was born on October 8th, 1948, also known as the Monster of Andes. Pedro Lopez is a Colombian serial killer, child and fugitive who murdered a minimum of 110 people, mostly young women and girls from 1969 to 1980. Now Lopez has claimed to have murdered over 300 people, and he's considered by many as one of the most prolific serial killers and in history. Born in Colombia in 1948, Pedro Lopez was the 7th of 13 children born to Benilda Lopez. Now Benilda Lopez herself was a sex worker and had a difficult childhood due to violence in the household and the absence of a father figure. Now Pedro's father, Megado Reyes, was murdered in La Valencia 6 months before his birth. Pedro Lopez was banished from his house at the age of 8 when his mother would catch him attempting to his sister. Pedro, now homeless at the age of 8, would now wander the streets where he was frequently abused. After this incident, Pedro then joined a gang of street children in order for protection, and at age 12 was adopted by an American immigrant family, but he was fled after he was assaulted by a teacher. In 1969, Lopez was sentenced to 7 years in prison for auto theft, and during this period of incarceration, Pedro was then by 3 other inmates, whom he later killed, resulting in his sentence being extended by just 2 years. Now, upon his release from prison in 1978, Lopez began wandering throughout the northwestern area of South America, eventually arriving in Peru, and he later would claim that during this period he had killed over 100 girls, mainly street children from indigenous tribes. Now, while these claims are unverifiable, it is known that Lopez was actually briefly captured by an indigenous tribe in south central Peru after attempting to abduct a 9-year-old girl. Now, this tribe would actually strip Lopez of his clothing and bury him in the sand with only his head showing. However, an American missionary actually convinced the tribe to release Lopez and turn him over to the police. Now, the police did not detain Lopez, and he was actually just instead expelled from the country. But after his deportation from Peru, Lopez just resumed his killing spree. And although authorities began to notice an increase of missing persons, more specifically young girls, throughout the areas in which Lopez traveled, they actually concluded that the disappearances were most likely cases of just human trafficking. But in 1980, the areas surrounding Ambato, Ecuador, were hit by flash flooding, unearthing the remains of several young girls who had previously been reported missing. And this revelation prompted the police to reopen their investigations and contributed towards Lopez's ultimate arrest later that same year. Now, not long after the flooding, a local woman named Kavina Pavoda was on her way to the market with her 12-year-old daughter Marie when Lopez attempted to abduct the young girl. Local merchants were able to overpower Lopez and hold him until the police arrived. While in police custody after his arrest, Lopez initially refused to cooperate during his interrogation, choosing to remain silent. But eventually, Lopez would start confessing these crimes to his cellmate. The problem was, his cellmate was actually just posing as a prisoner, and he was actually confessing his crimes to the police captain, Pastor Cordova. Now, Lopez boasted that in total, he had murdered over 200 in Ecuador, some 10s in Peru, and many more in Colombia. And he even described his MO as first luring the victim away from public spaces with a trinket, before and then strangling them with his bare hands. He additionally claimed that he would occasionally exhume the victims' bodies from their burial sites and have tea parties with them. And when asked about the motive for the murders, Lopez reportedly said, "I lost my innocence at the age of 8, so I decided to do the same to as many girls as I could." And soon after his confession, he directed the authorities to the bodies of 53 victims. And his confessions soon led to the confirmation of 110 bodies in Ecuador. So later in 1980, Lopez was convicted of murder and sentenced to just 16 years in prison. Yes, after leading authorities to over 53 bodies, then 110 in Ecuador, he was sentenced to 16 years in prison. And the reason being is because this was the maximum prison sentence in Ecuador at the time, which is mental. So Lopez then served his prison sentence at the Garcia Moreno prison near Quito and was released from prison nearly 2 years early, on August 31st, 1994. In an interview shortly before his release, Lopez would actually describe himself as the man of the century and said that he was being released for good behaviour. I'm assuming that good behaviour for Lopez was not murdering 3 inmates inside of prison like he did the first time round. After his release, Lopez was then deported to Colombia and was detained as an illegal immigrant on arrival, before then being handed over to Colombian authorities. Now, prosecutors were actually unable to make a case against him, somehow, and he was instead declared insane and then committed to a mental hospital. But just 4 years later in 1998, Lopez was declared sane and released on $70 bail, on the condition that he would periodically report to the authorities. He almost immediately absconded, and the last reported sighting of Lopez was in September of 1998, when he visited the National Civil Registry to renew his citizenship card. Then, in 2002, Colombian National Police and Interpol issued warrants for Lopez's arrest over a murder bearing similarities to his MO. But this Interpol warrant was actually deactivated in 2005, but Lopez remains a fugitive, and he's also been named as a possible suspect in a homicide in Tunja, Colombia in 2012. He also featured in editions of the Guinness World Record up until 2005, where they would credit Lopez as being the most prolific serial killer. But this listing was actually removed in newer editions after complaints that it made a competition out of murder. But there was just one for you, and I do plan on doing many more about potential active serial killers, with the next one being a rundown of the top 5 in the past 4 years. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one. If you did, then drop a like, follow, subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. But if not, then thank you for your time and have a great week.